Hello, everyone. It's the 25th of September, and this is the People-Centered Internet Community Call. I'm your host, Kevin Clark. Glad to have you with us. This is one of our open mic sessions, and would be delighted to hear from you if you have topics that you want to tee up. Put them into the chat session, raise your hand, and sometimes we have background noise, so if you'll put yourself on mute so that we can all, hear clearly, that would be fantastic. We do record our calls for people and reference in the future and to put into the PCI archives. So if you have any concerns about being recorded, this would be a good time to drop off or just remain silent. Thanks again for being with us. Okay, I thought that I would kick things off with a moment that is just around the corner in early October. I spent a lot of time mid-career with getting ThinkPad notebook computers, which were 30 years ago new to the marketplace. And I just thought I would just share a brief retrospective with you. Anyone want to care to guess what the first ThinkPad was? I'll show it to you. Here it is, okay? It was a tablet of paper, right, with IBM's, Think, right, motto on it. It was a giveaway. We gave this away as, to our customers from the 1940s through, the early 1970s. And people loved them. They would call in for the refills, all right, for the, and they called them ThinkPads, right? So we had this notional idea of ThinkPad as a name in our corporate history. People had already imprinted on it and it was readily available. So next question, what was the first, battery operated ThinkPad? Any guesses? All right, so it was a category that was consistently failing, all right, until something happened. But here it is. It was a tablet computer, right? Big, heavy tablet. This was a ThinkPad, and it failed. It, like everything else before the Apple iPad arrived on the scene, and they all had styluses. They all had a pen to write on the screen instead of using your finger. Nicholas Negroponte was right, all right, that navigating on the screen with your finger is the best way to, to navigate, all right. I would, before that, the best way to navigate was what Malin developed, all right, with Douglas Engelbart, which was a mouse, right? All of the things that we're just used to today weren't available. It wasn't until later.
What year was that, Kevin?
It was, like I said, it was, that would have been 2 years prior to this arriving, right? Which is, what you think of today as the ThinkPad, form factor, right? Which is red track point in the center, color screen. Richard Sapper, our designer, actually designed the first notebook computer, which is this, right? This is the IBM IBM PS2 L40SX, all right? And it was a big old clunky, right, machine. I mean, it was better than the kind of sewing machine stuff that was, basically putting a handle on a regular PC and lugging it around. We used to call those lovable luggables. But it wasn't until we got to the black form factor, the track point, and the color screen that it became iconic. In fact, we hid a whole bunch of these at Harvard Business School, about 600 of them for a class. And it wasn't an announced product yet. And so we had to hide them. And what allowed us to stay out of the media was the first Gulf War broke out. And we were able to, come out of that, and because it was a fairly short incursion, in the spring the following year, we were able to announce it. So I just kick off, right? 30 years ago, that's what was happening. And, it's an interesting moment in time, right? To mark that the form factor, still exists and people can recognize it, all right, all over the world. Hey, Maylin, glad to have your hand raised. Do you have a question or a comment?
It was just to celebrate your anniversary and
Oh.
how wonderful that to hear this history and to see the lovable, luggable.
Yeah.
But it's actually Mike Nelson who has a hand raised.
Yeah, Mike was, around at the time. Mike, delighted to have you with us. Topic or comment on ThinkPad? You're on mute.
I know I'm driving and unfortunately won't have all that much ability to talk as I'd like to, but I did want to celebrate the ThinkPad as well. My boss at IBM, John Patrick, was in charge of marketing the ThinkPad, and apparently the original name was some terrible series of numbers, and they came to him and said, "Here it is. It's the JR4732." And he said, "No, it's not." And they said, "Oh, yes, it is. We've already printed the manual." And luckily, they had a little extra time. They had like 3 days, and they came up with the name ThinkPad over the weekend. And you probably were part of that discussion.
Yeah, well, the fact is that the failure of the tablet made the name available, right? And Ruth Nelson, who was in charge of naming at the time, said, yeah, I guess we have worldwide rights to it. Yeah, let's do that. But John did force the issue.
Topic, and we can continue talking about ThinkPad and the incredible power it had.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to throw out the idea of discussing India a little bit, and I want to make the provocative statement that India is going to determine the future of the digital sphere in the next 10 years. Both some of the standards and, more importantly, online privacy, and also whether we build surveillance into it like the Chinese want to, or whether we think that privacy and free speech is a desirable outcome in the next 5 or 10 years. So that is, and I'm doing this for us. I have a hidden agenda. I'm going to India twice in the next 2 months. And I'd love to hear anybody who's had personal experience in India, has got some thoughts on what it should and could become, and whether they actually are going to kind of be the fulcrum around which a lot of the evolution of the internet and the cloud is shaped.
Okay, well, you can't see them because you're driving, but Lynn and Maylin have their hands up. Maylin, you were first, so please.
No, Lynn was first. Really.
Oh, Lynn was first? Okay, well then Lynn, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I had an interesting conversation in Singapore a couple of years ago about India versus China as the future economic powerhouse. India's population surpasses China, so on and so forth. And the comment was that India had four main issues with its economy. And one was the differential education, where you've got a class of spectacularly well-educated people, but the majority are not really well served. The second was the terrible state of the infrastructure. The third was the legacy of the class system, and the fourth was the corruption. And while none of that really addresses Mike's point about the future of innovation, I think it's indicative of. I was actually talking with an Indian graduate student over the weekend, and he was saying, none of those in his perception are significantly being addressed. They remain whatever progress has been made, and the progress is likely made in stovepipes rather than universally across the country. So Um, Again, I don't know how that translates to the points Mike is making, but I just thought I'd put that in the background as an overall India view.
I would, Lynn, just echo that there's,
Innovators who will
Mike's trying
move
to
to
say
the
something. Go ahead,
US
Mike.
and become CEOs.
Mike, you're coming in and out. Okay, so right
Yeah.
now you're not in a good reception area.
I'll just listen.
Okay. We'll try to call on you again when maybe you get a little bit further down the road. Lynn, I would just comment that when I was teaching at Indian School of Business, that your comments
I think I'm
are
going to be near a cell
spot
tower
on.
for a while to throw out an idea and then kind of go quiet.
Mike, we only got a fragment of what you were trying to say.
Signing off. I'll just be quiet.
Okay. So
Can I?
to finish the thought that I was trying to make is that, you know, the difference between India and China, from my perspective, and it was articulated by the, you know, in discussions with the faculty, is that it's a little bit more random, right, going on in India versus centrally planned in China. And so the opportunity for different things to emerge is probably more likely, right, for something interesting to happen that's unexpected. But at the same time, there is a concentration of, you know, people and companies that are, you know, leading in this space. So that said, Mei Lin, you want to jump in? And I see
Yeah.
Ben and Ian also have their hands up, but you're first, Mei Lin.
I'll have a quick intervention. Mike, I'll be in Singapore October 1st to the 20th. If you're stopping by there, we should meet. But I can actually put you in
I
touch
stopped
with.
by 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, it's all right. There are people that you could be meeting related to this, if you are interested. I am actively trying to encourage India's G20 presidency next year to bring digital policy to the forefront of their presidency.
Okay, great. Ben?
Well, I think Ian had his hand up prior.
well,
I think he had a comment.
When I was talking, I didn't see all the hands, so you just jump in, Ben, and we'll be next.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I want to roll back just for a minute to the, to your anniversary note. And I was on the faculty at Harvard till 93. We had certainly luggables that were there prior. And I sat in meetings with then Mike Spindler, who was from Apple, who was CEO while Jobs was out in the wilderness in looking at that. But I also wanted to throw in the timeline when we look at parallel evolutions. IBM was also involved with Simon, and at that time Emergent with the Simon. I have one of those, and if it wasn't for 10 cents a minute cost on it, it actually had some interesting designs, obviously, that manifest themselves in the Newton. So I want to set a convergence. We don't want to just look at the laptop evolution, but the PDA evolution and that convergence that ultimately became the tablet legitimacy in 2010, after when the iPad was rolled out. And it was, I say that because Microsoft had the Courier design, their foldable design at right around that time. So many things here. The HP touchpad was an excellent design, but the market was just evaporated when Apple came out. But if I look at it would be interesting to look at those convergence of those evolutions, not just any one of them, because
Yeah.
anyway, I just thought that would inform that.
I think that Tim Beharan at Creative Strategies has a flow diagram, right, that shows a lot of this stuff, connecting and I mean, I was just giving a macro perspective because I spent so much of my life, right, in that world. And I'll always be grateful that, in an advertising agency meeting where they were trying to give us a brand steward, right, after having done some research, the vice president, paused. He said, "Stop." He's from Denmark. So he says, "Stop." And it seemed like an eternity, but about 30 seconds later, he said, "No, I don't want the agency to give us a brand steward. Kevin will be our brand steward." Right. And so I got a field promotion in the meeting, and it was a great gift. Right. So great, forever grateful. Thanks for that, Ben. Ian.
Elon.
Elon,
yes,
I'm sorry.
thank you.
Elon.
No, that's all right.
It's hard for me to see the letters.
It depends on the font, whether you
Yes.
can distinguish it or not.
I need a serif font for this.
Right, exactly. I have something that's very much tangential, but I'll mention it because I think it underlies a lot of our questions. And when you bring up India, and I've worked in many countries around the world, and have gone from physical science to social science. One of the issues that clearly is important, and this will also come up maybe if Maylin and I go off on a bit of a rant on the G7, G20 process, but we'll get to that later. The comment I wanted to make is that I was approached by an Indian university in Kerala, the very southern western coast of India, and asked to put together a proposal in, I guess this was in May, with the German academic exchange program. And what they're doing is they're rolling out technology for water purification. And I mean, it's desperately needed. And the reason I bring this up is that when I started talking, so it's a university, it's heavily focused on engineering and on healthcare, community healthcare. So they have a fantastic program, and they have something like 250 villages, small villages all over the area, where they bring people in and they take students there for 10 days, 2 weeks to help them install this technology. The problem is that it fails a fair amount of the time. And so they asked me, so what do we do with this? And I said, well, that's a tough problem. But the question is, what do the students, when they show up in the village, what do? Well, I tell them how to use the system and set it up. I said, do they ever ask them what the problem is? No. Why would you do that? We know what the solution is. And I think the point is, as it turned out, we did write a proposal. I don't know yet whether we will get it from the German government. I think we have a fair chance, but it's a 4-year grant. And the idea is to do the kind of ethnography to begin to understand why in these kinds of contexts, not in the middle of Mumbai or Delhi, why do these kinds of technologies, which are incredibly important and powerful, fail? And I tell you this not because of the particular technology, but because of the need to keep thinking about the kinds of communities and cultures in which all of these technologies ultimately need to find a home if we're going to change at the level of the people-centered internet and people-centered access to the things they need for sustainability and life. Anyway, thanks.
It's an interesting intersection there, Elon, is I was just reading an article about farmers in the United States having to hack their John Deere tractors because, you know, the contract says that you've got to get them repaired by John Deere because they're so complex now, is
Yeah.
that there's a big opportunity to actually design things that are repairable, right? And, you know, to make them almost make retro kinds of things where you can recognize what the parts are and, you know, do the repair elsewhere. Because if you make it too sophisticated, it's going to break and it's going to remain broken, right?
Yep.
If it's so, but that said,
Kevin, I'd like to make remind people, if you have a chance, look up the history of Akash and Aadhaar in India. We face this fragmentation, high fragmentation, but I worked on a number of initiatives there, including the Akash or Spark deployment, which were tablets for 3 domains: for education, for medical, and for governmental activities. And the idea was deployment of millions of tablets, and concomitant with it, it wasn't just the technology. Khan Academy type asset libraries that made things available, the internet deployment accessibility for schools, if not the residential domains, for example, and all the medical facilities. So there have been initiatives that were broadly met there that did cross the different stovepipes. Now, I thought the Akash would win. It lost, but the Aadhaar, Aadhar, which I thought would lose, was the individual digital identity and digital record structure, which won, but it won in a nasty fashion because it had to be associated with a bank account. And the bank accounts were then exposed and revealed in doing that. But it's a point to make about the Indian domain that we always starts with a stovepipe, but that doesn't mean that those integrated mechanisms cannot be enhanced that can serve some of those domains. Sustainability is a different story.
thanks for that. Doug, you're next, and then Lynn.
Yeah, so really appreciate you reminding us about the ThinkPad. Personally, technology amplifies human ability to solve problems, and just as simple as that a notepad that come up with list out ideas. So that's a ThinkPad. How do you create thinking? And then of course with the PC, the ability to amplify these what human experience, right? And of course IBM's PC that started in the early 80s, and now we got 1 billion PCs. I think in 2008, I think is when we got to that state, and we're now almost people have a PC, computer, either a cell phone or a computer. So some technology, there's a lot of experimentation. Some things fail, but I'm a big believer of lots of experiments. And one way to experiment is to come up with creative ideas. For India, they have 1.3 billion people. How can we help them amplify and solve problems, right? And we're going to reach 8 billion people on the planet at the end of this year. How can we help, leverage technology and the internet to make it people-centered to help solve the problems of our planet?
Yeah. I mean, most of the advances that you see today in first world banking emerged in places with low bandwidth, right? And not with very little access to anything like a personal computer. It was, everything was in your hand. It was not the most recent, iteration of wireless, but it was low, slow, and it worked, right? And so now we're re-importing this back into, and it becomes m-commerce, right? Available to others. It's really interesting how that's affecting, first world commerce.
Exactly. Einstein said everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And we need to focus on simplicity as we roll out this technology.
Yeah, very good. All right, Lynn, you're on mute, sir.
Yeah. So 2 things. One is just in terms of the involving on the water project. I was involved a couple of years ago, actually 2009, with the micro hydro projects in Afghanistan. And basically, as part of one of the State Department programs, villages were given money for micro hydro if they would do away with poppies or something. Anyway, so the micro hydro has 4 components to it. There's a brick and mortar sluice that brings the water from the river. There's a holding tank. There's a penstock that takes the water down to the turbine and the generator. And so these were put in and they were working very well. And we came back about a year later and roughly 60–70% of them were inoperative. So it turned out that the problem was that the brick and mortar work had been shoddy and carried away in the first spring rains. So we put together some Afghan contractors at a fraction of the price, with really good brick and mortar work. Came back about a year later and about 60% of them were inoperative. And it turns out that the pricing system on this was everyone was charged about 50 Afghans a month. But obviously, some people are going to try to put computer centers in their houses, and other people just want a light bulb in the kitchen. And this was generating social tensions. And the guys who ran the project didn't have the chops to tell the village leadership, who were typically ones with computer centers, to they had to pay more. So the answer there was prepaid meters. So when you got cut off, it was a nasty meter, not per Ahmed, that had to deliver the bad news. So we came back about a year later and about 60% of them were inoperative. And it turns out there was no culture in Afghanistan for preventive maintenance. So even though you gave a perfectly good turnkey system, unless somebody went back every 3 months or so and said, if you grease the bearing, you check the fan belt, all that kind of stuff, it wouldn't work. And after that, finally, they worked pretty well. But the point is, there were 3 components to it. There was a technical component, which was the brick and mortar work. There was a social component, which was getting the payments right, and then there was an operation and maintenance component, which was going back and checking the, which I just saw it probably applies to most similar projects. The other piece, I just yesterday got a really interesting paper on community collaborative computing projects. And this is looking at the problems people have had of establishing partnerships on community computing. And what's really interesting about it, I'll send the paper to y'all, is it reads almost exactly like the lessons we've learned in PCI and the TRC, in the sense of nothing about us without us, establishing a community partnership, trusted interlocutors. It's all about get the partnerships right, to develop participatory models for decision-making and making collaborative decisions, and then sustaining the results of the project. So I think those things overlap really well with probably what we're talking about.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Lynn, for for sharing that. Coco, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here again, and was distinguished to see the ThinkPad and to see some history, and that remind me the first computer I get when I was at university, which was really too big, like this table, too big keyboard, small screen. And later, my first laptop I get in my life was a ThinkPad. And if I can remember again, in 2013, I get an opportunity to go to Dubai to purchase some voice over IP equipment. Then I found out that the laptop, the ThinkPad one, the black one with the red something that inside the keyboard. Then I purchased so many. I purchased some six devices. Came with to Kigali, and the first I set up my my local area network, but with using those laptops as IPBX. That's what I decided to do, because purchasing or buying voice over IP really ready system IPBX was somehow expensive, and then I decided to say, oh yes, I can take that some old ThinkPad and then transform it in IPBX, and it works smoothly. But I think that until today, I keep some 4 of them, and I'm planning to set up a real good laptop, a workshop of teaching voice over IP to people especially here in Goma and Kivu, where I really want to push up people, especially students, to know, to get more skills in technology, basic some hardware they can find out just in the low market, not using the big computers.
Mhm.
That was really fantastic when I tried to use them in Kigali, use them in Kinshasa. And right now I'm planning a second, a third workshop to do with. So I'm very happy to discover that you was using that and it fall really into your anniversary. And I think I will not let it go. I will still continue doing that, collecting back some old computers and boost up real good things which can be important for the new generation of coming here. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you,
Kevin.
Coco.
Thank you.
Some of the ThinkPads that I originally worked with NASA to configure as mission tools are still operational on the International Space Station. All right, they're still doing single tasks like operating the robot arm or showing, relative position to Earth, right? And once you get them up in space, they don't weigh anything, so they put them up on the wall with Velcro. They just put them up there. It's amazing. That was before we changed over to letters, X, 60 or something like that. Those were 760 computers, so they're pretty old, but they work.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Very
Coco.
well working. Thank you so much, Mr.
All
Kevin.
right. So I see that we have a guest that Maylin invited. Marissa, we're delighted to have you with us. How are you today?
I am well. Thank you so much for inviting me. And always, Maylin, always to be with Maylin, and lovely to meet people. I am coming to you from New York City. Have just had a very exciting week for Climate Week and also World Peace Day. I'm working in initiatives for both. And have been very, I'm a dedicated optimist by self-identification, and I'm very hopeful from what I've seen and heard and experienced this week. I feel that there's a shift. I am an educational psychologist. I work in the areas of conflict mediation. I work with climate. I'm a climate activist. I'm also in AI ethics, a number of different, and social emotional learning and those kinds of things, social sciences. So I'm just always willing to learn, and I feel very fortunate to be here to learn and see how I can contribute to what I believe is a very beautiful, I'm going to hold in my mind and my heart, a beautiful evolution of what humans are as part of nature, because we're not separate from nature. We are nature. So I'm a regenerative. I'm also into regenerative design. I mean, I could go on, but I'm not. In any case, I don't even know this community. I'm very grateful to be here, and always grateful to Maylin, who is a great inspiration to me.
Thanks, Marissa. Now, before you go, tell us why you became optimistic this week, as opposed to, because evidently you were not optimistic, right? Something happened, right? Tell us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, Kevin. I'm actually a dedicated optimist by my identity. And I don't mean that by positivity junkies, right? And I'll just call it that. I think that there are many people who, and God bless them, they believe that the world, everything is positive and it's always positive. I think I'm a realist with that. My optimism has realism. Almost like the Joanne Macy, not like incorporating the Joanne Macy Act of Hope. I believe that sometimes things are horrible, and that positivity as a way of believing requires denial that horrible things are happening. I have friends in Cameroon who just had horrible things happen to them today. I have friends all over the world who've had horrible things happen to them today. And what I love about that one person who contacted me is he is going to find, I always say, if somebody dumps me in the middle of the ocean is cold and I'm not going to be happy at that moment. But I'm going to look for something to hold on to get to the next place that I can get to the next place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's dedicated for me. That's just personally, I'm just expressing myself. That is for me, dedicated optimism. What I found this week was many things to hold on to. What I found with people in business where people kept saying, oh, all they care about is money, but I'd find one or two people. And then I would find the next person in the next industry and in the next place. And I'd find that one or two people. And to me, that's the connective thread.
Mm-hmm.
That's the connective thread of, I think, the possibility of humanity. I think I'm rambling at this point, but for my feeling of the connective humanity and what we have to offer. So I am optimistic. My optimism was restocked. I'll put it that way.
Good. I'm glad you're getting some signals like that.
I saw it from so many different channels this week, in
Mhm.
so many different places, because I work in so many different fields. I work in education, I work in business, I work, in activation, I work in all kinds of AI, I work in all places. To see it coming from so many places feels like the systems map
Mhm.
is joining through. Anyway,
Thank you. Well, thanks for sharing that. And thanks for being with us. So, Pat, I saw a comment. Go ahead, Malin.
I wanted to respond to Marissa. So glad you are here. But also to give some context on some of the climate work that People Centered Internet is doing. This last week, I was in The Hague in the Netherlands for the IEEE Planet Positive day-and-a-half session. And I found enormous room for optimism. It's very, very serious people are doing very serious things. And I had been working with the IEEE for the last 5 years, but this is the most energetic that I have seen them about a non-technical topic. And it's called Planet Positive. So it's not just about the climate, but really about us as human beings. And the managing director of IEEE's Standard Association, Konstantinos Karatsalios, he was trying not to raise it, but he broke out and he said, the mental health of children was really why he was doing this, that how can we treat everybody on the internet as though they're adults? And he is just fuming mad, essentially, about how we are not protecting our children and we are seeing the results in mental health. So I saw room for optimism. There was also Cornelis Block. I got to see him for the first time. He's one of the lead authors of the big report, IPCC. And, sometimes you wonder, these academics who write these reports, with every fiber of his being, he really cares. And sometimes it just takes the human person to person to see them and feel them, right? These are two people who you perhaps, are they serious? Do they really care? And I can tell you by personal testimony, yes, they're serious and they really care and things are happening. And we within People Centered Internet want to be a conduit for people in the community to engage And here on the American side, I want to say, I'm beginning to engage with the State Department on the American Pavilion at COP27, which will be in Egypt. It's not as though they've agreed yet, but it's looking promising. So if there are things that people want to showcase or do at the American Pavilion, they're calling it the Community of Climate Entrepreneurs. So there's openings for non-American entrepreneurs as well. So you can contact me about that. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Maylin. Greatly appreciate it. Elon, to see your hand back up, glad to have you back with us.
Thank you, Kevin. I just want to follow on something. I just had lunch with Maylin here in Potsdam, Germany, where I'm based part of the time, and Washington, D.C. the other part. But the comment I wanted to make to follow up, I mean, I very much appreciate Marissa's perspective and share it in many ways. One of the things that has always been for me very important is the question of what one personally sees as one's own goals and how that can be merged in a way that inspires others. And it isn't, you don't know if you will be successful. You don't know that you will make an impact, but there is a deep need in what, at least for myself and many of the people I'm fortunate enough to work with, to act according to that sense of self-identity, which you mentioned also, Marissa. And one aspect of this is that I have worked, I started an organization in 2008 called the Knowledge, Learning, and Societal Change Alliance, which I got tired of acronyms, so I use Classica with a K, as an institution around the world of research on collective behavior change and how we affect that, because that's a great deal of what we need to do. I mean, it's nice if people act in very individual ways, but we desperately need the kind of coherence. And that's something that Maylin has so marvelously championed with these community climate clubs. It is the community that we need to be working with on many levels in many places. Second thing about this is that I've focused now for 15 years at least on narratives, and particularly thinking about narratives in science. And people at first, the reaction is, that's literature, that's social science, don't bother me. But in fact, we need that insight, and that insight, it becomes important. The qualitative aspect becomes critical. If one is going to interpret models, for example, the socioeconomic pathways of the IPCC, you can make nice models, but do you understand, in fact, what that implies for how society functions or will function? And so the narratives become a critical piece. And last, if I may, actually two little things to add as specifics. We just published a paper in Futures, came out a month or two ago, on digital observatory of narratives of sustainability, with the idea that we want to look at narratives, not simply to say, okay, we'll look at the narrative, now we'll make a better one and persuade people, but rather let's look at what underlies these kinds of narratives, including the kinds of misinformation, et cetera. Why are they sticky, and how do they work in different cultures and communities? That's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to interject, if you'll forgive me, allow me, is that I just finished the preface for a book for the Haus der Kleinen Forscher in Berlin. It's the House of Young Researchers, which really does very interesting work. And they have just put together an absolutely amazing book with evidence studies of teaching computer science and digital literacy to early childhood, from age 3 up through elementary school. And I wrote a preface for this. And my main point is that we need to take this seriously as to how children from very early on, and also in very different cultures, some with support from parents who are technically literate, and some with no such support. How do we help them begin? It's not only about sort of critical thinking, but it's about having a sense of where they stand in the world when they use these kinds of tools and what that gets them. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Elon. I don't think you had the opportunity to hear a last speaker, Dr. Grant McCracken, talk about his work in his cultural observatory called the Griff. I might suggest.
Oh, yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay.
I for a minute I lost, but yes, absolutely. And I was very much taken by that.
So
And
I
will
suggest that
follow
you,
up.
if you, with your permission, write to me and I'll connect you, because I think that what you're doing in narratives and collective behavior change, he's seeing signals, all right, and you would benefit from looking at that.
I would love that.
The
very
other
much
is
so.
that, Choice Flows has a quantitative methodology that relates to a model that allows two dyads of like company customer, for instance, but it could go anywhere in the supply chain, that you would be able to understand whether the parties are misaligned, in alignment, or coherent, okay? Which means that they're tightly focused, right, in parallel, as opposed to just good general understanding. Our poster child for misalignment is Takata airbags, right, in Japan, right?
Yeah.
Is that they clearly did not understand what the auto manufacturers were trying to accomplish and had been working on for decades to say, we're a high quality manufacturer, you can trust us. So at any rate, if write about that, CCC, and I'll be glad to show you, the
I would very
organization,
much appreciate
customer,
that.
company aligned coherence model.
I
Okay.
would very much enjoy that.
Because
I
you
also
can
should
get numbers
mention-
out of this, not just a narrative, right?
Absolutely. The
Okay.
question is how you code that and for what purpose
Yeah,
and
exactly.
what you use with it. I will quickly mention I had very interesting exchange and need to follow up further also with Pat Scannell, who's on the call now.
Yeah.
And I think there are some common points there as well. And I think there are actually several of you I would love to follow up with. It's just this problem. I haven't finished inventing the 48-hour day yet.
There you go.
I just don't have
Make that
time to
happen
finish
for
it.
us.
I'm working on it.
Thank you. Doug, your hand's back up, and Marissa, I see comments in chat. I'll be calling on you next. Doug.
Yeah, and so I really appreciate this conversation shifting for sustainability and minimizing CO2 emissions, because that's something I'm very passionate about. I'm a big believer that I want to grow the abundance in the world of people, especially all around the world, because many people are poor and suffering. And unfortunately, the last 2 years, they've suffered even more. I'm an optimist as well, but sometimes with all the challenges of our world, I see a lot of pessimism. I'm a big believer if we grow the physical economy, even if we try to be more efficient, we're going to grow CO2 gas emissions, right? And people in India and Africa and other places, I would not want to be living like some of the people, most of the people in those countries, in those continents. So I'm a big believer that if we grow the digital economy, we can have abundance for all. We can reduce our CO2 gas emissions and reduce our abundance for all. So, like the Zoom call, it takes about 4 grams of CO2 gas emissions for an hour per person that's on this call. So, if we had to fly around, like I just came from a conference, this 10G conference on how to use, 10G communication technology for connectivity, for telemedicine, distance learning, and can we use that to lower our CO2 gas emissions, but still have much more rich and a rewarding environment. So, like in San Francisco, 45% of greenhouse gas emissions is due to travel and commuting. And so, I'm a big believer, if we're going to solve greenhouse gas emissions, we got to have a immersive technology, communication technology, how to have, I'm not saying everyone just stays in their home and does everything by Zoom, but how do you, balance it, like cut your travel budget, your, time in half, and travel for things that are most important, and for things that are less important, go with telecommunication. So that's one way I'm trying to solve the climate crisis and the CO2 emissions, climate, and grow abundance for all. So that's my comment.
All right, fantastic. So somebody want to start a new conversation thread? We're 10 minutes before the bottom of this particular section, and then we go into overtime. So you want to try something new and interesting? Pat, your hand is up.
Only because I have a lot of respect for Mei Lin, and she sent me a message saying I should talk about what I'm up to. And then Ilan had mentioned me earlier.
Okay.
I'm in this bizarre space where I've been in a writing sprint for the last few months. I gave a talk at IEEE in Silicon Valley. The conference was the annual conference on privacy and digital media and social media. And then I gave the same talk a month later to the European Association of Archaeology, and the topic was the return of magic. And what was a metaphor that I used in a couple of my other books has now become its own book project. I'm now deep into a new unfinished, unpublished book called The Return of Magic, in which I argue that technology has become so increasingly dense, and our modern niche is so complexified that when you open the hood of your car or you try and explain some technology to somebody, it might as well be magic. Now that's cute and fun, and it doesn't seem actionable until you really unpack it. So I argue to the archaeologists, and I think convincingly, that the positivist tradition, the progressive tradition over the last few centuries that led to doubling of lifespans, increases of human rights, and some of the abundance that Doug was talking about, may have peaked just about ironically the time that Fukuyama's End of History came out. And that since that point in time, the increasing complexity and change, remember complexity and technological acceleration means change, has started to cause loss, fear, confusion among many cultures, which I believe leads directly to activities like polarization and popular movements in January 6th at a mass level. But at a elite level, if you will, this return of magic is demonstrated when I sit around a boardroom negotiating a multi-billion-dollar deal, and I realize nobody in the room understands how all the pieces fit together, much less the consequences of it. And when I do DoD work, it's absolutely the case that the generals and colonels and civilians in the room rarely see outside of their specialty. And this hyper specialization means that the technologies around us are like magic, even though we're an expert and we're in the room. And then finally, this leads to situations like the Boeing 737 MAX. So I don't need another unfinished book sitting in my laptop hard drive, but I've spent a lot of time in the last few months unpacking the literature on magic and trying to draw the linkages that I've been sensing. So, Mei Lin, I hope you don't regret asking me. So,
Thanks, Pat. That's
Not
good.
at all. Could I just respond?
Yeah.
absolutely.
Pat, I wonder if you would consider actually doing a book with the PCI community. I just planting that idea so that this book with the return of magic could actually be a vehicle if you were open to structuring it for different members of the community to put in their 2 cents, either as commentary or a discussion point or homework for the reader.
And anthology.
Yeah.
So I'm very open to that. It's funny because my dear colleague, MacArthur Foundation said there's only 2 people working on the future of thought at the level that I am, and that's me and this guy Carl, who was up for a Nobel Prize a couple times. And he and I had a great conversation yesterday. Carl wants to sit in a dark room and write for years. This kind of brilliant work that he does. I'm more collaborative. I'm at best a B+ grad student. And so when I talk to Alon and others, I love it when people rip my work apart, and I'm very collaborative, and I'd be open to that, Malin. Most particularly these days, I'm concerned about actually not just writing, but getting stuff published. So if the collaboration would also accelerate the publication of these ideas and get them out there to start making a difference, I'd be open to that. So maybe we can talk offline, anybody who's interested in that.
I would like
Thank
to
you.
tell a story because of that. Most of you have seen the movie The Martian. Yeah?
Mhm.
Matt,
Yeah.
Dan, yeah, yeah. Okay. That started as a series of articles in a discussion group. And it was all scientists. And, the Martian is full of solving problems with science. Well, the reason why The Martian, the book and the movie is so interesting is that it was an entire community that kind of said, well, what about he faced this problem? What about potatoes? What about this, that, the other? And it was like there was huge science put into the book, The Martian. And now high school science teachers use it as a way to teach science. It makes it interesting for high school students because there are real problems and they're seeing, wow, I'm going to science my way out of it, says The Martian. And it's just fabulous. So that's the inspiration that I want to give you, Pat. Do The Martian for digital.
You couldn't be any more aligned with my MO. I'm totally on board with that. Thank you.
So I'll just add, Pat, you're interested in making sure that, it sees the light of day someplace. So I'll just volunteer that, I know some people who are in publishing. So the best thing to do would be to get all the people who are potential contributors, create the eminence around it, and then have it accepted before everybody writes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've got some experience with that. And the fact that it was well received in these two very different audiences, the Silicon Valley techies and venture capitalists, and then these archaeologists, because my statement about this is a potential inflection point of 300 years of humanity's progress seems provocative and clickbaity, but I got support from the archaeologists on that. So I think that there's some there, and I'll look forward to following up with you and others to polish it up into a proposal.
Okay. Fantastic.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you, Malin, for catalyzing that. And, you clearly tapped right into Pat's interest. So that's a good thing. Marissa, I didn't call on you before. Did you have a comment in chat that you wanted to bring forward? Then I'll go to Lynn. Something that you wanted to add to our conversation?
I'm not sure which comment that was. I have so many thoughts going through my mind at the moment.
Okay.
I have a couple of things. There was some things on oh, I know what it was, the things on magic. But one of the things I wanted to it was I think Doug mentioned literacy, AI literacy and internet literacy. And I have a colleague at IEEE. I am the co-chair of the AI Ethics Education Committee. And one of the biggest issues we have, of course, is the fact that internet literacy, technology literacy is not available to so many people in the world. And in fact, even here in New York City, the inequities are shocking. And I'm in the schools, so I know it to be true. And I have a colleague there. I'll share that resource. I have to leave soon, but I have a resource, a colleague, Mashika Allgood, who is a civil rights lawyer, who also has been now created an AI literacy initiative, has created resources, and many of them are free resources to bring people up, because as she's a civil rights lawyer, as she puts it, AI literacy is a civil rights issue. And there's no way of, it's a human rights issue. And I don't want to say human rights because that can go into but it's a social rights issue. It's an equity issue. I've had conversations with people in Cameroon this week who have no access. So I just wanted to, I think support that, Doug, what you were talking about, is that really important, that need. We have the capability. There's no reason we don't have the capability. We do if we want to.
Mhm.
So I just really feel very passionate about that. And I wanted to be great. I would just wanted to express my gratitude for that, for uplifting that, because I think that that's it is part of our future. So anyway, I'm going to put it that unfortunately I have to run.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for always for Maylin. I'm always grateful for Maylin. Grateful for all of you welcoming me. And I hope to see you all again and collaborate.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
And we are at the bottom of the hour. So as is our tradition, thank those of you who joined us for our first hour. For those who want to stay for overtime, we're delighted to have you join us for the next half hour of overtime Q&A and discussion. Lynn Wells, you're next. You're on mute.
I
Sir.
just wanted to summarize some of the Puerto Rico work we're doing, because
Okay,
obviously
great.
with Fiona, there's a lot happening. But even before Fiona, we were looking at the possibility of doing some additional work on resilient internet in Puerto Rico. And one of the areas, what's happening is a lot of money, like $700 million plus, going into making the internet more resilient there. But it appears to be going into making the infrastructure of the traditional ISPs more resilient, and not necessarily getting to the underserved communities out in the mountains and things like that. So we focused on some of those. And the key piece that is power. I mean, you can't get to resilient internet without resilient power. And we've seen after Fiona where the entire grid collapsed. So one needs to rethink the power issue. So anyway, we have a proposal in to see if that gets supported. In the meantime, of course, Fiona happens. And we've seen what has happened, and through Maylin's and others' links to the Puerto Rico and the U.S. White House Puerto Rico Task Force, we've actually been asked to help with thinking through some of those issues about where to go forward. So, and the final piece of this is there was a summary of this done on the digital Puerto Rico work that the PCI did back in 2018, and again introducing some of those ideas into the way going forward to see what might be applicable. So that's a very exciting area.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Doug, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just would.
Then I'm going to ask Maylin to tell us something about Hasso-Plattner and her recent experience there. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, just echo, connecting the unconnected. There's 1.3 billion school children on the planet. Unfortunately, 2/3 of them don't have connectivity to the internet at home. And, it's the challenges is, especially when you have disasters, how do you get connectivity, and for energy and connectivity is so critical. I appreciate the comments about artificial intelligence and education, because, there's all this abundance that if we know how to use the technology, you can amplify the human ability. And, but if those students don't know how to use it, and can't, doesn't have that lever, then they're limited. So, yeah, you have to have availability and affordability of the internet, but then you have readiness and, to use that technology. And and is relevant to their lives as well, what's important to them. So, I am very excited about some of the satellite technology being developed this decade. But part of 5G advanced and 6G is to integrate the cellular networks of with the satellite systems out there, so that just like Apple just announced that, and T-Mobile announced partnerships with satellite companies, so that even you can have at least limited bandwidth connectivity for this technology. So it's taking longer than we'd like, but this is the technology I think that can the needle, and that's why I'm an optimist, even in light of all the challenges in our planet, that if we use this technology properly, we can really help move the needle for abundance for all.
Fantastic. Maylin, you were just recently part of a multi-day experience at the Hasso-Plattner Institute. Would be great for you to share little bit of that experience with us. I know that I received your invitation to join, but I had previous commitments, so I very much would have liked to have said yes.
Sure. So Hasselplattner Institute is associated with the University of Potsdam, which is why I'm here in Potsdam, but just outside Potsdam. Hasselplattner was one of the founders of SAP, and he helped to start the Stanford Design School, Design Lab, and the collaboration between the Stanford and Hasselplattner Institute has been going on for 15 years. So this Global Design Impact Conference was to celebrate the 15th anniversary of that collaboration. And there were folks from Stanford here as well, including a dear friend of mine, Ade Mabuganje, which I was delighted to see him here. And we hadn't seen each other in Palo Alto, but we saw each other here in Potsdam. What was interesting for me, and I really only was here for one day, because the previous day I was in another conference. The panel I was on was with Konstantinos Karachalios about essentially design and humanity, and it was good to really have a chance to talk about the importance of designing it right up front. That we can't. It's so difficult to make things people-centered after you find out all the problems, that if we can train and have people learn how to think in advance about making things people-centered, taking into account ethics, taking into account when you're designing systems, how much energy do they use? It really brings out the importance of really transforming our education system, that we need to prepare our next generations for living in a quite different world, not just digital, but one in which we're facing sustainability issues, where immigration is just going to increase because people will be in areas where there's droughts or famine. So I think it was mind shifting for me that engineering schools are starting to think about how do we need to change the curriculum for sustainability by design. And then we had the assistant dean from MIT, from urban planning, and she really also sort of, this is the final session of the day, she really reinforced how much MIT themselves are rethinking the engineering curriculum going forward. So this is becoming widespread. It's no longer a optional extra design thinking. It's becoming design thinking or die. And I think it was a very good conference. While I have the floor, I will talk about the Planet Positive at TU Delft in the Den Haag in the Netherlands. It was also one where basically the big guns are all moving. They don't quite know where to move to, which is where PCI and IEEE and the engineering schools really need to start getting involved at the policy level, because things are moving, but nobody quite knows where to go or when to do it or how do we do it together. A lot of questions. And it's almost like it could be worse, right? We're trying to save the world now. Oh, let's rush over here and let's rush over here. We need a kind of map, and that I left Planet Positive with a sense of how do we have data-driven policy? How do we have evidence-based feedback that allows us to, you know, coordinate our actions and not having it be, do it because I tell you, because I know better, trust me. But we need to have the data so people can reach their own conclusions and then work out how to coordinate together. And this is a real, I think, intellectual challenge for us ahead for humanity. Back to you, Kevin.
Thank you for sharing that, Maylin. A question is, you know, I used to work with the D School at Stanford when I was an advisor to the California College of the Arts Design MBA program. Is the Design MBA still a topic of conversation in any of these circles, or is it on the decline? Because
this is the first mention. I
Okay.
never knew there was a design MBA.
yeah, there are a handful of design MBA programs around the world, but I think that it hasn't received sufficient visibility or, you know, mass for it to be a desirable degree by employers yet. So thank you for that little piece of reconnaissance. Greatly appreciated. Lynn, you had some thoughts in chat. You're on mute. So
My main point was going back to Flagler May Lynn's, is that my experience has been basically the big mistakes in the project are made in the first hour. When you get started on the wrong road. And so her point about really making the planning up front, I think is absolutely, and spending the time up front to make sure the design is in the right direction is so critical.
or that you have the problem defined properly, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you could spend days on, you know, trying to solve the wrong problem. Yes,
Principle
Ben.
No, the principle I always used to tell my students is you usually fail in the first 5 minutes because you neglect a stakeholder or carry an assumption or belief throughout the project that is not sustainable over time. So I didn't even give it an hour. I gave it 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah. You know, going back to, you know, what I teed up at the beginning, John Lynch at Duke University wrote a case about the shift when we went and did this global research project about what people wanted to do with ThinkPads. It was behavioral as opposed to feature function. And, you know, that's been a blessing because I've been able to take that and teach that case to graduate students around the world. But he came to a conclusion after he said it was really good science in terms of who you identified as customers and what they were doing. But the more miraculous thing is you actually got the organization to do something about it. And what I've, come up with is one, I went and asked the people who are going to have to do something about what we found out from the research. What do you want to know ahead of time? So that they wanted the outcome, right? As opposed to, delivering some wisdom into the organization that they said, what is this? I don't care about this, right? And it ends up being like epoxy glue, good behavioral science, and then getting the ideas elected to office, like it's a political campaign, right? That you get people that want to do something about it. Okay. I think that is what Marissa was beginning to sense, is that there's a constituency beginning to emerge for, what we care about.
Maylin, are you, do you know Vivek Wadhwa? Does anyone?
Yeah. I kind of do. Vivek was part of the I4J folks. He's a big author, and so he may not remember me, but I do remember him. He was very active within the I4J meetings, the Innovation for Job meetings, probably in the mid 2015s, something like that.
As the discussion on the India comparison comes up to mind, and certainly my interface apart with Akash and Adhar was through Vivek. I've known him for about over 30 years now. And I'm wondering do you think he would be an interesting prospect speaker for us at PCI?
I think if you as an old friend of him would like to invite him, we'd be very open to it.
All right, so Ben, you have a to-do.
Yeah, another thought, Pat put up a message in the chat about referencing the nomad century. And certainly we're dealing with tens of thousands already, if not many more, that are in nomad lifestyles, and working nomad lifestyles now have grown quite a bit. It used to be a persistence of something beyond vacation, but less than full residency. That I want to spend 2 years in Costa Rica, then 2 more years in Portugal. And I'll use Portugal as a base of operation for traveling around Europe, that kind of thing. It's moving more. Populations are growing, both young and aged, in terms of residency that's again much more than vacation, but much less than persistent long-time residency. And that nomad community is growing quite rapidly. One of my my students is CEO of an organization called Nomad X that facilitates and helps people move into that lifestyle. And it might be interesting to get a group or panel and discussion to look at that activity. The interesting rapid growth is among people that still want to work, but don't want to live, but want to live where they want to live.
Now, this may not directly relate to the current situation and how people are, calibrated, but an anthropologist that I used to work, it's not Grant, right? It's a different anthropologist, said that people who have this nomadic tendency, the ones who are most successful and effective in being able to move around always have a place to go back to, right? They don't completely disconnect, right? That there is that there's some center of gravity that gives them the confidence to be able to move around. If you simply uproot and are moving from point A to point B without that connection, that it becomes distressful over time, right? That you have no grounding. Now, I'm just telling you that that's what was the results of that research. All right. I don't know whether you can successfully become nomadic and not have that now.
I'm wondering if there might be a new interpretation too, though, where in the past it used to be around place. What if it was people? What if it was a diaspora, for example?
Could be.
That maybe
I mean, it could be that that whatever
anchors
represents
diaspora.
grounding or centering or center of gravity has shifted to something else. I don't know. Okay, so we're coming up to the top of the hour. Let's go around and see if there are any residual thoughts before we wrap up today. Joshua Stein, we're delighted to have you with us. We haven't heard from you, so I'm going to just invite you to see if you have something you'd like to share. And did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, I'm not prepared now, but to be honest, to speak, but I feel very honored to be allowed to follow your discussions here. It's very exciting for me. And my name is Joshua Stein.
Joshua,
I'm from
okay, thank you.
Northern Germany, Joshua. And we work with Particip.ai in space of participation by digital tools like artificial intelligence, like conversational AI, and other methods digital methods for education, participation on education, healthcare, information in general, and on value adding. So that's just a short intro, but I would be very happy to intro that more detailed on another call, for sure.
Thank you. Great. We appreciate you being with us, and thank you for your introduction.
Thank you.
Coco, anything else that you'd like to share from the continent of Africa today? I don't know, perhaps not. Yeah, there he is. Anything else,
yeah.
Coco?
Actually, I'm concentrated in preparing some workshops.
Well,
I have to organize workshops here in Goma in next 3 months, probably next 3 months. As you know, all time, if you Google about Kivu, you will always read or get answer about war, about assassinations, about something like that. And I think that technology can bring some positive story of the regions. And that's why I decide, last week I took a boat and visit all over the lake, some Iceland, contacting people, how I can organize training. And I plan to do it with some partner by next 3 months, probably.
fantastic. Well, we wish you well and success, all right, for those workshops. All the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Ben, Lynn, Maylin, Doug, Pat, anything else that you want to share today?
Yes, I want you to talk, Kevin, about this thing that I just put it in the chat. What is this GDP&E?
Okay. Choice Flows is working on a companion to gross domestic product. When I talk about this publicly, I analogize this to going to a restaurant. The GDP is essentially only talking about the kitchen. It's only talking about the food that's coming out of the kitchen, right? Which is not a full description of why you go to a restaurant, okay? Because that's the back of the house. The front of the house is where you have a dining experience, where you experience the service, you have a decor, right, that you appreciate. There are a whole bunch of things that you might consider intangibles. However, these are attractors, right, that create, the circumstances for someone to want to live somewhere, wanting to locate their business there. So we're creating a companion metric that's called general domestic experience, okay, which is the front of the house measures, right? When you put it back together, it's GDP and E, right? It becomes the metric that is GDP and adding the experiential components that make you want to live and work and have a quality of life, right? This would go back to what Kat Vach was talking about in the Quality of Life Lab, all right, in Geneva, right? You brought, her, she is involved in part of this conversation and background, as a reviewer. And so our experiential components, the starting point is the Calvert-Henderson quality of life indicators, right? Mm-hmm. But we're adding others, and we learned a lot in the work that we did in the state of Washington for safely reopening businesses in the wake of COVID, about giving people indexes. They don't want to look at 200 or 300 different data sources that are generating data every day. So we organize them into community health, economic health, quality of life, right? That they could look at those 3 indicators as composites and make some better decisions. We're now trying to offer this at a macro economics level as a better way to think about, community resources and thinking about running a city, or, you could scale it up to nations and regions. And at the microeconomics level, it's reformation of accounting, because accounting does a very poor job of accounting for intangibles, and the economy is increasingly becoming large swaths of it, intangible. So macro, GDE&E, micro, reformation of accounting, and the intangible components of the economy. So are we having fun? Yeah, it's very interesting work. And I was very encouraged by what I heard John Havens talk about at the IEEE. So I've connected with him on LinkedIn and expect to engage in a dialogue with John pretty soon, because his work sounds, very compatible, Malin. Make sense? Okay. Well, with that, I want to thank you for joining today. I see that you want me to, reconnect with Marissa. I'll do that. And I appreciate you being part of this open mic session.
Lynn has
everyone-
something.
Lynn, yes, Lynn.
I just have one request, which is
Yes.
has to do with anybody who's doing research or knows of research on adaptability. We've spent a lot of time on resilience and understanding what resilience is, but the question is, the last part of resilience is adaptability. And so how do you after you get past the disruption and you're operating the new post-disruption, new normal, how do you encourage people to adapt to that? Where a good, thoughts? That's just my request for a future session.
Oh, so that's a topic.
That's a topic. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at it now. I have not found any, remarkable insights into it yet. And so if anybody is working in that area, I'd love to.
I want to suggest that you read Ralph Stacey's book, Complexity and Creativity in Organizations. Ralph D. Stacey, Stacey.
Complexity and what?
Creativity in Organizations.
Got it. Okay.
It's a very good volume. It lightly moves into some Santa Fe Institute work, right, on fitness landscapes. And that is all about adaptability.
Cool. Thank you.
You bet. Read it and we'll compare notes. It's in my permanent collection. All right. Thanks everyone for being part of the call. Looking forward to having you in 2 weeks. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.